Welcome to Influence, a production of This Week in Health IT, where we discuss the influence of technology on health with people who are making it happen. My name is Bill Russell, recovering healthcare CIO and creator of This Week in Health IT, a set of podcasts and videos dedicated to training the next generation of health IT leaders. This podcast is brought to you by Health Lyrics, helping you to build agile, efficient, and effective health IT. Let's talk. Visit healthlyrics.com to schedule your free consultation. Today, we explore the transformation of healthcare to consumer-centricity. This was a huge topic at HIMSS, and it continues to be a wave that's crashing over healthcare. We're going to have this conversation with Jeff Gourdji, a partner with Profit, a global, I hope I get this right, a global agency that helps companies with brand, digital transformation, and growth acceleration. Good morning, Jeff, and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Bill. Thank you for having me.
Is that pretty close to what Profit does?
Yeah, absolutely. We consider ourselves a management consultancy that helps our companies grow better through the things you mentioned, through marketing and sales transformation, brand strategy development, experience and innovation, and organization and culture changes. And we do it across a lot of industries. I lead our healthcare practice and spend most of my time in healthcare, which includes everything from payers, providers, pharmaceutical companies, and a whole bunch of other folks that live in the healthcare ecosystem.
Yeah, so you guys have been busy. So you and Scott Davis recently released a book, Making the Healthcare Shift, the Transformation to Consumer-Centricity. And
Yeah.
I'll start with congratulations, but tell us about the process of writing the book.
Yes, well, it's thank you. It's been a 2-year journey, and I think of it a little bit like running a marathon. If I ever run one, which will be once I run a marathon, I will be a marathoner, and there'd never be a reason to ever run another one. Scott tells me I'll feel differently. It was 10 years since his last book, though, and at the moment I'm feeling like this. I'm an author, and once this, no matter how many books I write, I'll still be an author. So I may just stop while I'm here. But it's been a fun process. I've learned a ton doing it. I've been very lucky to have access to a lot of people who shared their insights and stories. And looking forward to sharing some of that with you, Bill, and with on this conversation here today.
That's great. So I'll tell you what, I'm impressed with how logical it's laid out, but just to give people a little perspective, 60 organizations, 250 executives, it's global in nature. So it's large hospital systems, payers, pharma, medical device, digital health companies, US, Asia, and Europe. And so you have literally talked to people around the world about this whole change that's happening. And I guess it's not just a US phenomenon. Digital is transforming people's expectations and changing the way they want to interact with healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's both, the case for consumer centricity is there's a couple ways of thinking about it. One is that people's expectations are changing, right? For all the reasons you articulated, through their expectations with other categories and other ways of interacting. And the benchmark for a good experience is no longer that how did this health system treat me versus a different health system. It's how they do everything else in their lives, Amazon, Uber, et cetera, et cetera. So there's certainly the expectations change, right? At the same time, there's also the economic pressure. And this is not just a US phenomenon, this is true around the globe, to get a handle on just skyrocketing healthcare costs. You can make the case it's more acute here in the US, and you look at our percent of GNP, et cetera. But healthcare budgets global budgets around the world are being strained by healthcare costs. So you put that together with the consumer expectation changing, the cost pressure, and in a lot of markets, certainly in the U.S., all of a sudden consumers, high deductible plans, et cetera, have the financial incentive to seek out and to engage in their healthcare a little differently. So there's actually an important clarification that we make. You've had to make it. So for some people, they say, "Oh, consumerism is all around winning with consumers who increasingly have choice," and that's true. And a lot of times, in a lot of contexts, a lot of cases, consumers do have greater choice for the reasons we've talked about. However, as you know, particularly here in the U.S., there's also restricted formularies, restricted networks, restricted plan choices. So in some ways, in some markets, consumers have less choice. But that doesn't lessen the need for this transformation that we write about, because the transformation is both how to engage consumers when they're quote unquote, shopping for healthcare, but it's also about engaging consumers as they behave in their own life and their own health, and helping systems like Intermountain Healthcare, which arguably have less competition than a lot of other places, are at the forefront of helping consumers change their behavior so they act healthier and behave healthier and have healthier lives and at lower costs.
Yeah, so you lay out the book pretty well. So it's the case for change in healthcare, which you just jumped into, and then there's 5 shifts, and we're going to go into the 5 shifts. But the case, so let's go into the case a little bit more, because as a CIO, I had to make this case, and I think a lot of health IT professionals are trying to make this case, which is we have informed consumers, we have motivated consumers. So we now have consumers that can get some pricing online. Technically, I mean, there's some transparency that's starting to happen. So they're informed, they're motivated, and even if they're in a walled garden, if you will, in sort of tied to a provider or provider network, they may change jobs and end up not being tied to that provider, or they may be on a high deductible plan, and those kind of things are changing as well. So you have informed and motivated consumers. You have new entrants, as you said. You have the care anywhere kind of telehealth players. You have Oscar and the insurance. So you have a bunch of new entrants. You have government pressure, which you talked about a little bit in terms of just I mean, if you watch all the stuff that's coming out from Seema Verma and CMS and whatnot, you're seeing an awful lot of push towards opening up the market to opening up healthcare to market pressure. And then I think there's a societal pressure that maybe you didn't touch on, which is just, if you're in healthcare and you go to a party, invariably you hear horror stories. You hear this, oh God, I got 7 bills. And there's a societal pressure that, hey, you know what? My life's changed in so many different areas. Mm-hmm. When is healthcare going to catch up? Does that capture sort of the case for it?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I've surmised is that making the intellectual case for change, that consumers are increasingly in charge and should be in charge, is pretty easy, right? Every health system I've walked into, and probably you as well, says something like patients first, right? Patients, right? So the intellectual case for the need to empower consumers, as we prefer to call them, or patients, is pretty clear. The emotional understanding of the need to transform organizations is, or the intellectual case for need for transform organizations is relatively clear. I think where it gets harder, and you probably know this from your past experience, is when it comes to both financial investment, right, and B, the cultural change required to make the transformation. So it's a little bit of moving organizations from, knowing to knowing, which is intellectual, to believing and feeling, and that's harder, right? That we always get the question, okay, you tell about these shifts, how do we get started? How do we do this? And we can certainly touch upon that.
We
newsflash, newsflash, there's no easy 30-second answer.
No, and we are, because I mean, one of the reasons I was drawn to your book, which originated with some research that you guys have done, as you say, a couple of years ago, and I was drawn to it because you actually do get into we make the case, and a lot of consulting sort of ends there, and you get into some very pragmatic ways that these health systems have gotten in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to march through the 5 shifts, probably read a little excerpt from your material, and then just jump into some questions. So great. The first shift, from tactical fixes to an experience strategy. And I'll just do it in your words. So while healthcare organizations often start enhancing consumer experiences in one-off initiatives, and that is so true, they should move towards optimizing entire healthcare journey as a strategic priority. Doing so requires establishing a vision for the organization, hiring the right leaders to take charge, and creating an experiential plan to change and win with the consumers. So give us there's an awful lot there. Give us an idea of what this first shift looks like, from tactical to a holistic experience strategy.
Yeah, so I can't help but thinking in 3. So let me give you 3 thoughts in your in your question. I'm a management consultant after all. The first one is CX, and you reference it, is going from a to-do item to something the business organizes around, right? So if the idea that the definition of customer experience or patient experience is let's have friendly people that greet people as they enter the hospital and help them find their way, that's a good thing to have on a to-do item. But that doesn't fundamentally change the experience, right? I'd say the same thing about initiatives to reduce night noise in the med surge unit, or an initiative to reduce wait time when people call the call center with a billing question. All those are good things to do, but in and of themselves do not galvanize transformation. When it becomes truly around like not something on the to-do list, but the overall strategy for it. Let's just take health systems as the most present example. Is it becomes the organizing idea for everything we're trying to do. So one of the stories we can talk more about, Piedmont Healthcare and how they did that. That's kind of point one, though, going from a to-do item to something the business organizes around. The second thing, and this is related, is going from a touch point orientation to a relationship orientation. When I measure HCAHPS, that speaks to a single night stay in the hospital and did I have a good experience? Now that's more than one touch point, that's several touch points, but versus an NPS type of measure of what's the relationship a health system has with people in our communities, that's a very different way of thinking about, just as from a metric standpoint, how to think about patient experience holistically and a patient experience strategy holistically. And it takes you to doing different things. And then the third idea is what I call going from fixing what's broken to a brand experience, right? Fixing what broken mentality is, where are we pissing people off and how do we stop pissing them off? And again, that's a good thing versus saying, what's the unique way that our organization, want to live and be perceived in the marketplace and be different? And let's synchronize what we're telling people, what we're telling them about why they should come here versus what we're actually delivering. And let's make the promise that we make through our marketing communications match the promise that we deliver, right? And make sure it's unique and differentiating and relevant. So those are the three ways that we think about making this shift from tactical to more holistic.
That's really interesting. I like the distinction between fixing the problems and touch points, because in conversations we talk an awful lot about touch points. Here's where people experience us, but they experience us more. If you're going to change the culture, it's more than just about fixing all these little things. I mean, you can fix up all the things that are wrong with the house, but still the foundation's broken. Yeah. And you just don't galvanize or mobilize the organization to change the way they act. And I guess that's what you're after here, is really changing the entire healthcare system to be thinking about experience holistically versus just fixing the things that are broken. Does that capture it?
Yeah. No, exactly right. And to your point, one of the things we write about is this need to jumpstart change, right? To in order to galvanize, and there's a few examples we use. I mean, for me, the most classic, and it's now a few years old, but what Geisinger did a few years ago with their proven experience money back guarantee, right? And what we hear from our interviews with some of the leaders there is that when Dr. Feinberg first put this out there was a lot of grumbling about the new guy and is this crazy and how are we really going to do this and how would this work? But in a few years only 500,000, put air quotes, only 500,000 in payments made in refunds. Well, $500,000 could have easily been justified by the quality of the PR they got. That publicity alone would have made it a good investment. But far more important than the PR was how it changed, because all of a sudden they could track service line by service line, location by location, who's giving refunds. And it signaled as much internally that they were serious about this and serious about, putting the consumer at the center and really being consumer centric and winning with them. And that tactical program, that experience strategy became a galvanizing force for change.
Yeah. Are there other health systems? I mean, you share a lot of stories.
Yeah.
Intermountain, Avant, Piedmont, others, but are there other stories around that, around this movement?
Yeah, I think that those are my favorites and my go-tos. But almost every client we've worked with, transformational change, usually starts with. It sometimes starts bottoms up, sometimes it starts tops down. But even when it starts top down with a vision, it's got to have a series of quick wins and small moves to start to prove it's not flavor of the month. We've seen it with a pharma client recently has done it. We've seen it with payers as well. It's really a pretty consistent pattern. The question is, in any company, there's always a million initiatives going on. How do you create something so compelling that it actually starts to get people to act and think differently? And that's why I go to that example.
Yeah, at our health system, we actually, we did the journey mapping around a specific around orthopedics, and then we identified, and I think you had some of this in the articles. Know me, care for me, ease my way, and to be honest with you, we had two others. I don't even remember what they are now, but but essentially what it was an attempt to get the organization to start thinking about. How do we get to know the patient more? How do we make sure that we're not asking the same question over and over again? How do we do our core competency and do it well in terms of caring for them? But then how do we do it at a price point that is palatable, to give them a bill that is understandable? And the ease my way thing is where we end up spending a lot of time, because there's an awful lot of friction within healthcare. And that was really our starting point. Would you recommend a different starting point, or where would we start?
It's a good question. So I think it depends on who's driving the transformation, right? When it's CEO led, it very often starts with this shift one, right? Setting this vision for what does consumer centricity look like for us, and how does it fit with our overall business strategy? And then it cascades to some more tactical fixes. And we'll talk about the shifts later, 3 and 5, if it's marketing, led by a marketing function or an experience function, it can start with, a new base of insights and understanding of consumers. It can start with a approach to innovation. It can start in different places. When it starts more grassroots, and for grassroots leaders that aren't leading big functions and aren't necessarily tangentially part of this, part of the C-suite or close to the C-suite, it almost always starts with some of these smaller types of pieces. And sometimes it starts with, stop pissing them off, I didn't mean to dismiss that at all, but it starts with some of those things around just, getting to know folks a little bit better, and start to make sure that everyone else around you knows more about what they're dealing with.
All right, well, let's move to the second shift. You have from fragmented care to connected ecosystems. And again, I'll introduce it with the snippet here. So although payers, providers, and pharma companies are finding new ways to work together, the healthcare journey is still fragmented for most patients, causing frustration, inefficiencies, and high levels of dissatisfaction. Operating in a healthcare ecosystem rather than in a standalone entity is the only way those in the healthcare value chain will survive and thrive in the future. Yeah. So this is about orchestration. Give us, what is this shift about?
Yeah. So again, a few ideas, but the story we sometimes like to tell, and it's getting older and older, but some folks still remember it well. When Apple launched the iPhone, they didn't just say, we're a manufacturer, we're manufacturing it and shipping, and good luck. They actually picked a single carrier in AT&T and formed a close partnership with them. Now, I'm sure there's all kinds of financial reasons they did that, but it also allowed them to work very, very closely with the AT&T team to make sure that as people were signing up and getting on board and learning how to use this, and back in the era of even what is an app, right? They took charge of the whole journey, right? And they integrate themselves in the whole journey, rather than saying rather than saying, we manufacture the phone, call somebody else, right?
Yeah, we're gonna go live with 20 manufacturers, and now all of a sudden you have all sorts of sign up problems and issues across the board.
That's right. So hopefully the analogy starts to become reasonably obvious to healthcare, where very often consumers all the time. I called the insurance company, they said one thing. I called the hospital, they said call the medical group. I called the medical group, they said call the hospitalist group. And there's that leads to that fragmentation. That's just from a billing standpoint, right? Then of course there's the specialist telling you one thing and there's other specialists telling you something else. So the opportunity in this shift is around owning and connecting that entire journey, even if it hasn't historically been in the purview of payment, for example, of a particular provider, or making there's smooth transfer of information between specialists. So in the case of where value-based care create the financial incentive, it's in theory easy, right? It's never easy, but it's easier because all of a sudden the financial incentives start to get aligned. But even where that hasn't happened, if an area where consumers have choice and are looking for that, and winning and competing for them is making sure the experience is not frustrating, there's opportunity for all systems, regardless of their reimbursement strategies, to think differently about this. So this is around a couple of things. One, instead of owning your piece, owning the entire journey, right? This is around thinking about everything's done. We invent things here, and that's what we do, and we're exclusively in-house, to external collaboration and partnership, and really empowering teams to think about, instead of just owning discrete responsibilities, having the metrics in place to create empowered problem solvers within organizations, so they're not passing patients or consumers off.
Yeah, and this is challenging. I mean, we just recently had somebody on the show and we were talking about social determinants of health and the partnerships that are now the whole new set of partnerships for healthcare systems that have to sort of pop up in terms of being able to coordinate care and responses to those kinds of things. So this is really, I'm going to put on my IT hat. This is really challenging because now you're trying to orchestrate things across multiple systems, multiple data silos, multiple those kind of things. Is there a way of doing this that sort of smooths that out, that sort of says, hey, we're gonna orchestrate this, and then we're going to deal with the complexity at a later time?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm sure I could learn more from you, Bill, than you can learn from me. But just a couple of thoughts. One is where we've dealt with this with clients, where essentially the IT stack and the system's inability to integrate and the investments required to make those things happen can kill things that are otherwise, pretty light types of investments. We worked with a pharmaceutical company recently that was in the oncology space, trying to create some of these, to a non-IT person, reasonably easy solutions. How do we create tracking apps, and how do we make sure that we allow the data to be shared between the patient that enters it and our company and the pharma and the oncologist? But of course, as you know, that's way easier to draw up than it is to actually architect from a system standpoint. The answer there, there's a couple of answers, but in this case, it was finding partnerships outside of, finding digital health partnerships to white label some of these things and starting to create these things outside the ordinary stack, going around the ordinary stack and systems to do that. Now I may be stepping on a third rail with your listeners and with the CIOs out there. I don't know. But I think, in the end, I think it comes down to finding creative ways around some of those challenges, because if it takes 3 years to put that in place, it'll be out of date.
No, and that's what you're saying is what we're seeing more and more within the CIO ranks, which is, pulling different things together and sort of making sure that they can communicate on a standard set of APIs and those kind of things, so that we're building more platforms and a lot less application silos so that we can be responsive. This is a fascinating conversation for me. Anyway, the third shift, from population centric to person centric. So this is where it really gets interesting for me. So healthcare organizations must move away from creating products, services, and experiences for groups of similar consumers, such as those who have the same condition or those who fall into the same demographic. Health organizations must begin to create products, services, and experiences for consumers based on their individual needs. Now this, the technology left here gets really interesting, but I want to talk about what this means. So you want to move from populations all the way down to individuals. So there's got to be a couple steps there to get from there to there.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know of any scenario or any manufacturer in almost any business that can truly create personalized products, right? There's a lot of places that create the, with common platforms, create the appearance of customization. I don't know that that's necessary here. That's not necessarily what we're talking about. What we are talking about is a couple of things. One, our payers who talk about, we have segments, we have large group, we have large group commercial, we have national accounts, we have local groups, we have Medicare, we have the exchange, all organizing consumers by essentially the products or the funding mechanisms in that case, right? In a health system, it's typically by disease state, right? Or occasionally by insurance source, is the way they think about different groups of different people. Now, at a product service, and so that's to your point, I think about this two steps this way. The first step is how do you start to create products and services and experiences that are not lowest common denominator? And that usually requires identifying a group of segments, or personas is sometimes a more in vogue term these days. And what is that, 5, 6, 7 personas, picking the 2 or 3 to customize around and maybe create a couple of different flavors and varieties. This idea, sometimes people say, well, wait a minute, we have to serve everybody. We're a community hospital. How can we just pick 2 of our 7 personas and focus for them? And it's a fair question, right? None of this is to suggest we're firing our patients or not treating anybody that comes in. But I would contend to you this: when Gatorade, this is going to sound like a far-fetched analogy here, when Gatorade set their design target for designing their products and their services and their experiences as competitive athletes, they built a strong business. When they watered it down to become a lifestyle brand, their business went down dramatically. When they went back to focusing on the competitive athlete, or 3 to 5% of their volume, all of a sudden it became relevant and interesting and appealing for a whole lot of other people, right? So again, rather than picking lowest common denominator of what works for everybody and creating generic experiences, how do we pick 2 or 3 personas as bullseyes? And maybe there's 2 different bullseyes, so we're not trying to do just one, but pick 2 or 3, focus, create something for them when we make the big scale investments in product, service, experiences. That's the first bit, right? The second bit, which is obviously, what's getting all the airspace and media today, is how do you then really, using AI algorithms, personalize, but then in the end, it's probably using those product, services, solution platforms and groupings that have been created using segments and personas to customize the delivery, customize the communication, customize the content. So it's a little bit of a 2-step. First, get from big populations to personas and pick the right ones. And then from there, that's where you make the big scale investments in products and services. But then when you get to actual delivery of content, et cetera, that's where, IT can help create a really more of an illusion of customization, but certainly a true customization when it comes to some of the specific things: messaging, frequency, content, et cetera.
So let's break this down. So so a lot of health systems have created personas. I know Banner has at Providence. One of the things Aaron Martin did when he first came in was created this persona. Well, there was a couple of personas created, but the one he really honed in on was expectant mothers, because they make so many of the decisions around healthcare. And the thought process was, if we can meet their needs throughout that entire process, then we can build out from there, because they're going to give birth, the birth of the child, and then you can start to figure out how you're going to care for that child, a child potentially born with a chronic condition, a child that's born healthy. And you can sort of move along that path, if you will. The creation of personas, what does that process look like for a health system?
Yeah, there's different flavors. I mean, it can be as easy as, picking a group and saying, let's design everything around expectant mothers, your example. And it doesn't need a lot of rigor. It doesn't need a lot of, custom research. It just takes some good strategic sense and agreement to focus on a particular group rather than trying to be all things to all people. Where we've done, more rigorous, formal, quantitative segmentations with clients, it can have additional benefit. One, you can go beyond what I call demographic characteristics, expectant mothers, right? Because one thing we know is that expectant mothers engage with healthcare differently. They have different attitudes about their own health, their own wellness, what they can afford, their belief that either they're all going to die and therefore there's no point, versus a belief that they can change their future by acting and engaging. There's all kinds of different ways to think about expectant mothers differently. So, when the resources are available and the wherewithal is there, moving to more, formal quantitative segments that are multidimensional in nature, that take into account not only life stage, for example, expectant mother, which often has a narrower demographic component to it, but multidimensionally thinking about people's attitudes, their needs, their psychographics, their orientation toward their own ability to take care of themselves, their families, et cetera. And then you can do so my first case, I talked about kind of pick one, right? Then there's, let's use a survey to understand consumers in our marketplace and break them into groups. And then I think the third most robust is let's actually, and the payers I've seen do this more than providers so far, is let's actually use our database and let's type personas onto our database. So we actually can say, of our members, we know 17% are in this persona with 80% accuracy, 22% are in this persona based on that accuracy. So we not only can use it as a construct to say, how do we design products and experiences based on their attitudes and needs, we actually can use to understand our own quote unquote book of business.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. You've talked a lot about data here, and so data collection becomes one of the becoming a data organization, an organization that knows how to collect the right information, that has the right guardrails around privacy and obviously, but also a mechanism for creating value from that data. It becomes really important. So again, what does that look like? How do you create that sort of data ecosystem, if you will?
Yeah, and again, something that you and your listeners will have plenty of experiences that are relevant as well. But there's an idea that we put forth, we think, and we're starting to work more and more with clients on. It's around a data strategy, and the core of that is a customer data value, what we call customer data value exchange, right? So on one hand, it's easy to collect lots of data and then figure out what to do with it later, right? A more strategic approach is to understand, based on the customer journey, based on your holistic experience strategy and the things you're trying to impact over time, what is the most critical data that you can use in the next 12 months? And what's the critical data you can see yourself beginning to use and call it the next 3 years, right? That's to uncover the data needs. Then from there, what is it going to take to get the consumer to share that with us, right? What is that data value exchange that says, I know you're a little concerned about privacy. I know you're a little skeptical of any organization that goes, gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you're no longer a local hospital, you're now a big health system, so I'm more and more skeptical. And how do you create the proposition? So classic example that doesn't work for everybody, but I think it illustrates the point. There's an online platform many of your listeners may know called Patients Like Me, based in Cambridge, that has the most transparent customer data values exchange strategy I've seen. They essentially say, I'm paraphrasing, give us your data. We will sell it to life science companies. But in doing so, we will help create the next generation of cures, so your next of kin won't have to live with the horrible diseases you will. If we can help the pharma companies create cures, your next of kin won't have this, right? Their summary headline of it is data for good, right? And it's literally, at least last I checked, literally right on their website. Give us your data, here's how we'll use it, and here's what you get for it, right? So that doesn't work. That doesn't work for everybody, right? But what is the proposition? What is the proposition based on those data needs that you want? How do you make clear to consumers why, if sharing the data will make their life easier? It's not just ability for you to use it to manipulate them, but you're going to use it to help make their lives better. And that's really the consumer-centric view of thinking about data strategy. And then, of course, all the hard work behind the scenes that the IT community has to do.
Yeah, but I mean, culturally, if you can, well, first of all, they have to set up the mechanisms for collecting the data in the proper ways. But one of the things that I think creates the cynicism amongst users is when I give you my data and it's not used effectively. Yeah. And so that's where you talk about the ecosystem as opposed to just sort of and we have a data department over here that does analytics and whatnot. You're talking about something where the data sort of mashes around and starts to inform future decisions and future experiences and customized experiences and personal experiences.
Yeah, no, exactly. And just as an example, I mean, we just did focus groups very recently for a payer client, and we hear it from the same people in the same, not focus groups, actually just qualitative interviews with folks one-on-one. And we hear from the same people that would be saying, I don't trust you. I don't want to give you my data. And on one side of their mouth, the other side of their mouth will say, you already have my data. You know me. Why can't you show me that you know me? If you know who I am and I've called the call center 3 times, why when I call next time do you pretend like you've never talked to me?
Yeah.
So there's still those privacy concerns are still there. I've sensed over 10 years of doing this type of research, there's more and more willingness to share data. But there's also, at the same time, that comes with an expectation, to your point, that it's going to be used to personalize things, even as simple as answering the phone and saying, hello, Mrs. Jones, I see you called us before.
Yeah, which is actually, from a technology standpoint, a pretty easy lift. So your fourth shift, from incremental improvements to pervasive innovation. And I guess at this point, we're really starting to hit on all cylinders. Here's what you have to say. So instead of settling for small and time-consuming improvements to already established systems and processes, organizations should reimagine innovation. They need to be consistent. They need to consistently adopt both an innovative and a minimally viable product mindset using
Yeah.
a portfolio of innovative approaches and smart changes. And but one of the sentences in this section, the healthcare industry continues to struggle with innovation because it has a crippling aversion to risk, which is understandable. I mean, we manage
Right.
risk that is very acute. The difficulties of proving a return on investment for long-term projects and a lack of structure for rewarding successful innovation. So
Just those three things.
yeah, so we have to. This is a big cultural move. Where have you seen this? How have people been able to sort of break out? Because some are starting to really break out in this area.
Yeah. Yeah. So three ways, but let me just give you an example just to really illustrate the point, I think, a little bit before I share the three ways with you. We have a client that is in this case, it's a pharmaceutical company. I think this is most acute in pharma, but also elsewhere, but where people have been giving permission to text message them. They've literally been saying, yes, here's my number, please text message me for 2 years. And I can't get alignment between regulatory affairs, legal affairs, medical affairs, IT, and all the other pieces of how they're going to do that, right? And of course, it's born out of the right reasons, right? Adverse events are important. They want to make sure if they hear about them, they can treat them responsibly for the good of the patient, for their own kind of shareholders, et cetera, for all those reasons. But these are people that have said, yes, it's okay, please text me, right? So the diagnosis I think I'd offer here is that the historic culture of clinical innovation, and let me just again use pharma as an example, though I think it certainly is relevant with the health systems as well. The orientation is we're going to test something in a very small scale, and then we're going to test it again, and then we'll test it with animals, and we'll test it with small numbers of humans and bigger number of humans, bigger numbers of humans, and then we'll make sure legal affairs and regulatory affairs and legal affairs, they're all through this process to make sure that when we bring a product to market, it's safe, it can get through the regulatory structure, et cetera. So that culture of making sure things are safe, that is there for all the right reasons when it comes to clinical innovation. Unfortunately, that culture often bleeds over to what I'll call experience innovation, right? So we can't do anything. We can't put out an app or an online set of tools until we've tested it and tested it again and run it 7 ways to Sunday. And that becomes a real barrier to innovation, because then by the time you come up with it, right, it's no longer state of the art because you've tested it for 5 years, right? Versus the Silicon Valley approach of let's put the most minimally viable product out there, the MVP approach, the 1.0. And you know what? We'll roll out a new version in 4 weeks and another version after that. And Facebook every 2 weeks, it's a bad example these days, but any kind of online app, every 2 weeks, they're going to send you an update and you're just going to download the newest app in the app store, and right, it'll improve and get fixed, et cetera. So that's hard to do, but we came across, here in Chicago, what's now Advocate Aurora Health, with their example of, the mammography program, where 1.0 version was Call and Be Seen Today, right, which hit on a major pain point around, the anxiety that comes with, needing to get a mammogram. It evolved. The 2.0 version became Call, Seen, Get Results Today. But it took an extra 6 months to align up all the operations behind the ability to go from Call and Be Seen Today, which took some doing, right? But Call, See, Get Results Today was another version. So they didn't wait till they can get the result. They started with Call and Be Seen Today. And I think 6 months or so later, Call and Be Seen and Get Results Today. And then the 3.0 version is to continue to scale that to other procedures, et cetera, versus saying, we think same day appointments are a good idea, but let's take 3 years to make sure we can do it across all of our points of care, all of our service lines, all of our geographies, and versus let's start small scale and roll it out from there. So this MVP approach is, I think, one of those, and it's a little bit just a different mindset. It just says, what's the minimally viable thing we need to put out there with all the important caveats that, again, if we're talking about an app, we don't need to test it through 3 phases of clinical trials, right? We can go a little faster. So kind of one is this MVP approach. Second, we see companies using internal incubators and trying to set aside and create the new culture and to change that culture and bring in different talents and skill sets and give them a pot of money and let them go to work. And third, there's just the accelerator organizations that are not necessarily tied or loosely tied, right? So the Texas Medical Center Innovation Institute is a great example. They provide a safe space and some coaching and support, and they have a very competitive process for promising startups to get into the program. They come in for 6 months. They give them access to their member hospitals so they can accelerate their innovation. Right? The former innovation director told me, look, these startups, these digital startups, it can take them 12 months to get an agreement to even run a test with a health system. They don't have the cash and the burn rate to survive that long, right? So the hospital systems are stifling innovation by some way by being so conservative and making it so hard for startups, where a lot of the innovation is coming from, to partner with them. Sometimes those accelerator programs can be a way to shortcut that.
Yep. Yeah, we had Darren Dworkin was talking about his accelerator a couple of weeks ago, and and I think there's more and more of those. It creates a different set of challenges, but I'm going to put on my IT hat here for a second, because this is one of the areas where the IT staff is going to say, here's the challenge. You could stand things up pretty quickly. Like we did telestroke program, and people were getting all bogged down. And what we ended up doing was just doing, essentially a video link between the place with the specialists and the remote location. And they were able to share a medical record because we already had shareable medical records. And then it was just a matter of getting the telemetry data. Well, we just used off the shelf kind of stuff. We stood something up very quickly before we tried to, and that happens in IT all the time. But when you're talking about the consumer and the consumer experiences, there's an expectation of, oh, well, we'll just use FaceTime. Oh, well, we'll just use, we'll just text back and forth. The challenge becomes the regulatory environment which we live in. We have to capture all that stuff. And so when a doctor and a patient are texting each other, that's in Apple's walled garden, and we don't have access to that data. But then when the lawsuit comes that says, hey, we told you about this, we have no record of it. So there are some challenging things there that we that does actually cause us to, I don't know, slow down a little bit and think about it, just because our environment's not quite Silicon Valley-esque in that it's highly regulated.
Yeah, no doubt. Challenges exist.
I like the MVP approach. Have you seen, so when you talk about creating an internal startup, you reference the accelerators, but have you ever seen anybody just, have they taken groups of people and just said, they're part of the organization, but they push them over and they say, act like Skunkworks, act like a startup and start innovating, but they're actually employees of the health system? Have you seen that model?
One that comes to mind is pharma, Boehringer Ingelheim, create kind of BIX, right? And I don't know what their legal employment status was, but essentially it was a funded group. I think it might have even been a separate entity. I'm not sure whether the employment status changed, but it was the best. It was trying to create the best of both worlds. It was a startup in terms of culture and expectations and motivations. But they brought in both, and some of the legacy members of BI went over to bring the expertise and the know-how together with new employees. And again, I don't know whether they became legally new employees or just kind of parked in the separate business unit, but it certainly created the employee experience of being separate and into the side.
So we're talking a lot about consumer and patient experiences, but there's also the providers aren't happy. Are you looking at that side, or are you just mostly focused on the creating experiences around this consumer? Because I mean, that's the really the core hypothesis here, is that healthcare is changing around the consumer.
Yeah.
And what do you tell organizations that get caught up but we have to create these experiences for our providers as well?
Yeah, so it's a great question. The focus of our research was primarily on how organizations are transforming because of the empowerment of the consumer. And part of that answer is always, and the most influential groups are very often the physician groups, and bringing them on board is critical to make the consumer happy, but also to make them happy and achieve the success they need. Carl Armato, who's the CEO of Novant Health, said, and I'm paraphrasing, essentially, we used to get caught up in provider experience versus patient experience. Now we just call it the human experience, and we need to stop thinking about them separately. We need to think about them collectively as a group. Dennis Murphy at IU Health didn't quite put it in those words, but as we did the work with him, some of the strategy work around their transformation, he also wanted to think of those almost equal and critical audiences, because I think they have, I don't know, 20,000 employees around the state of Indiana, and making them happy was certainly crucial. There's research, and it's hard to say what's causation, what's correlation, but there is some anecdotal evidence I've seen is that there's a correlation between staff satisfaction and patient satisfaction, right? Well, which is it? Is it that happier patients makes the staff's jobs easier, or is it that happier staff makes for more engaged, friendly delivery of care, so that makes the patient happier? I don't know, but it's pretty intuitive to me that you can tackle them together and holistically.
Yeah, we're on the home drive here. I'm sorry, I'm smiling. I'm one class away from finishing my MBA. I just finished my statistics class, so listening to you talk is just washing all that stuff over me again. So shift number 5, from insights as a function to an insights operating system.
Yeah.
And establishing insights as a function is critical to gathering intelligence on the consumer, but it's not enough. Interesting statement in and of itself. Healthcare organizations need to create a culture of consumer obsession where everyone in the organization keeps the consumer front and center at all times. Organizations can build this by creating an insights operating system. So tell us what an insights operating system is and how we get there.
Yeah, so my colleague, Christine Brand-Jones, who leads our insight practice, gave me this analogy, so I'm not going to take credit for it, but she said, an insights operating system is when you have the quarterback and the receiver working seamlessly together in a passing game, right? So what's short of that is, you had said, it's not enough just to have insights and intelligence. It's not enough to have a great quarterback. Someone's got to catch the ball, right? So the organization needs to be able to also to generate insight and useful information about how to meet consumer needs when they make business decisions. And they need an organization that knows how to use the information and integrate it into business decision making. One large payer that we spent a lot of time with probably has a 25-person staff just in market research, not marketing, just in market research. And this is several years ago, so it might be a different number by now, generating all kinds of reports, doing all kinds of research. But yet when we interviewed their internal customers, they said, they're always issuing these reports. I don't know how to find them, what they mean, and even what it means for me. So the insights operating system is around the seamless integration. I would venture a guess, and again, I spend most of my time in healthcare, but inside some of the large technology companies that are so good at being consumer-centric now, Amazon, for example, I don't know, do they have a formal market research department? Maybe, or is it just that, does Nordstrom? Probably, maybe, right? Maybe somewhere in corporate, but it's really everyone's job to understand kind of consumer needs and how to meet them. So that's the principle that we talk about. So the question is, how do you do that? How do you take that philosophical construct and how do you make it happen inside a company? So we've seen a few things. One is we've seen, Aetna, Dave Edelman talks about creating an account management structure where he took his market research team that was organized by functional expertise, statistics versus survey design versus that type of thing, and reorganize it around business units. So each business unit has a partner from that team that's assigned to get to know the business, understand the needs, and bring back information in the context that's useful to that business unit. So that's kind of point one, reorganize around an account management structure on internal customers. Number two, Eli Lilly and Company made the decision, rather than hiring deep experts in the methods of market research, they're going to make that role in insights a rotational program and have seasoned executives from not only from marketing, but from sales and other leadership functions rotate through what's a traditional market research function, spend a year and a half there, because A, they bring business insight and perspective into the role, and two, when they leave it and go back out to their other roles, they also have an understanding of how to think about it. So again, trying to create that seamless flow of information beyond just doing additional studies are a couple of the ways we've come across how organizations are starting to think a little bit differently and create that insights operating system.
So really, it's, by the way, that last example is really fascinating to me, and I'm gonna think about that for a while. But we get caught up a lot of times in this conversation of who owns it and who runs it, and I would say, because you're talking about a cultural change that has to permeate almost every part of the organization, it needs to come from the CEO, and they need to own it. But with that being said, you can't have IT over here doing their thing and marketing over here doing their thing and strategy doing their thing and operations doing their thing. I mean, those four need to be so knitted so closely together that it almost operates as one person's brain. They know what each other's doing, and they're integrating data collection methods, they're integrating insights, and they're delivering them back. But they're also educating people on how to use it, and they're empowering people to create new solutions around. What you're saying is like, this is the final exam. This is the capstone for an organization becoming a consumer organization, and it's where all parts of the organization are sort of intertwined, and it just continues to build upon itself until it creates these insights for the organization.
That's well said.
No question there. I feel like I'm leading the witness. Sorry about that. No, I mean, that's exciting. This is exciting stuff. So, hey, actually, we're at the end here. So I really appreciate this. This is a great book. I will, I'll throw up a picture of it on the video when I put it out there. But the book is Making the Healthcare Shift: The Transformation to Consumer-Centricity. Scott Davis, Jeff Gourdji, and I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing these insights. This has been great.
I appreciate the opportunity and enjoyed the dialogue very much.
Well, thanks. Well, this show is a production of This Week in Health IT. For more great content, you can check out the website at www.thisweekinhealthit.com, or the YouTube channel at thisweekinhealthit.com/video is the easiest way to get there. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.